After 17 years of work, she receives a worthless piece of land, until she hears something strange in the soil. Martha Miller held the papers with trembling hands, while her boss laughed in front of her. 17 years of hard work, waking up at 4 in the morning to clean the offices of Harrison Construction, and that was her reward. "Mrs. Martha, you should be grateful," said Richard Harrison, adjusting his expensive tie as he watched her with contempt. "That land is worth more than all the salary you received in those years." "But Mr. Richard, what am I supposed to do with this land?" she asked, looking at the documents describing a lot on the outskirts of El Paso. "Nothing even grows there." The businessman shrugged as if the problem wasn't his. Martha knew that rocky, dry region well, where all you could see was cracked earth and scattered stones. It was the kind of place nobody wanted to buy, even at a bargain price. "You worked all those years without a legal contract, right?" Richard continued with a malicious smile. "So you can't complain about a pension or any of that. That land is more than you deserve." His words hurt more than a punch to the chest. Martha had trusted the promise that she would be put on the books after the first year, but the years went by and it never happened. Every time she asked, Richard came up with a new excuse. "You promised you would register me," she said, feeling her voice falter. "Promise? I never promised anything." "You misunderstood," he replied, turning his attention back to the papers on his desk. "Now take those documents and get out of my sight. Tomorrow I want someone else cleaning in here." Martha left the office with her legs wobbling, holding the papers as if they were her life sentence. On the street, she had to lean against a pole to keep from fainting. At 68 years old, she was unemployed and stuck with a piece of land that was worth nothing. The scorching El Paso sun beat down on her face as she walked home. She lived in a tiny rented house in the Lower Valley neighborhood, where she paid $200 a month to Gertrude, an old woman even crankier than herself. When she got home, she found her son, David Miller, waiting at the door. He had driven 3 hours from Houston after hearing about his mother's dismissal. "Mom, I heard what happened," he said, hugging her tightly. "That man is a scoundrel." "David, my son, I don't know what I'm going to do now," she poured out, showing him the land documents. "Look what he gave me as payment." The 42-year-old man took the papers and studied them carefully. He had a degree in accounting and knew how to read contracts better than his mother. "Mum, legally this is worthless. He gave you a piece of land nobody wants to get out of his labor obligations," David explained, shaking his head. "We need to sue him. A lawsuit costs money, son, and so does a lawyer." "We'll figure something out. Let me see if I know someone who can help." That night, Martha barely got any sleep. She kept thinking about how she had wasted so many years of her life trusting Richard Harrison's words. She always arrived early, cleaned everything with care, never missed a single day. And in the end, she was discarded like old trash. The next morning, she decided to go see the land she had inherited for herself. She took 2 buses and a van to reach the area, located 9 miles from the center of El Paso. The place was exactly as she imagined, arid, full of rocks and without a single tree. "Good heavens, what a God-forsaken place," she murmured, stepping onto the parched earth. The lot was approximately 1/4 of an acre and bordered a dirt road. There was no electricity or running water in the area. A few scrawny goats grazed on the sparse vegetation nearby, but even they seemed to struggle to find something to eat. Martha walked across the land, trying to imagine what she could do with it. Maybe build a simple little house and raise some chickens, but without water it would be impossible. Maybe sell it to someone? But who would buy a place like this? That was when she heard the noise for the first time. It was a muffled sound, as if coming from beneath the earth. It sounded like a constant whisper, almost imperceptible. She stopped and paid attention, thinking it could be some buried animal or even her imagination. The noise came from the farthest area of the land, where some larger stones were piled up. Martha approached and crouched down, putting her ear close to the ground. The sound was there, definitely. Something was moving beneath the earth. "How strange," she said to herself, getting up and shaking the dust off her skirt. On the way back home, she was intrigued by that mystery. During dinner, she told David about the strange noise she had heard on the land. "Mom, it must be some broken pipe or something," he said, not giving it much thought. "That area was used for all sorts of things. There's probably buried debris out there." "But son, the noise didn't sound like a broken pipe. It was different. You're worrying too much about this. Let's focus on what matters, which is getting your employment rights." David had gotten the contact of a labor lawyer who could help with the case. Mr. Mitchell had a small office downtown and was known for fighting for the rights of the underprivileged. The next day, mother and son went to the lawyer's office. Mr. Mitchell was a 50-year-old man with gray hair and prescription glasses who received them warmly. "Mrs. Martha, unfortunately, cases like yours are very common," he explained, analyzing the few documents she had. "These businessmen take advantage of the good faith of workers." "Doctor, I kept some payment receipts over the years," she said, opening an old bag full of crumpled papers. "Great, that will help a lot. We'll file a labor lawsuit seeking recognition of the employment relationship and all the rights that come with it." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. While the legal process moved along slowly, Martha began visiting the land more often. Something about that place intrigued her beyond the mysterious noise. Maybe it was the feeling of finally owning a piece of land, even if it seemed useless. On one of these visits, she ran into old Joe, a neighbor who lived in a small mud-brick house about 200 yards from her land. The 73-year-old man was sitting under a mesquite tree watching his goats. "Are you the new owner of that piece over there?" he asked, pointing with his chin at Martha's land. "Yes, I am, old Joe. Martha Miller. Nice to meet you. Joseph Sullivan at your service. You know that piece of land has an interesting story, right?" Martha moved closer, curious to hear what the neighbor had to say. "What story, old Joe?" "About 15 years back, some folks from the city used to come here and do strange things. They brought trucks full of debris and dumped it all over that area. The people around here complained, but they had official papers saying they were allowed to." "Debris? What kind of debris?" "A bit of everything. Construction leftovers, pieces of wall, stone, old sand. They kept at it for about 2 years, then they stopped and never came back." That information made Martha even more intrigued. Could the noise she was hearing have something to do with that buried debris? She decided to investigate on her own. In the following days, she went back to the land armed with an old hoe she had bought at a used tool store. She began digging in the area where the sound seemed most intense, near the pile of larger rocks. It was heavy work for a 68-year-old woman. The ground was hard as stone, and the sun beat down without mercy. But Martha had a determination born of much suffering accumulated over a lifetime. After a few hours of digging, her hoe struck something solid. She dug around it and found pieces of concrete buried about 1/2 meter below the surface. The more she dug, the more rubble she found. Old Joe was right, she murmured, wiping the sweat from her face. It was then that she noticed something important. The noise grew louder as she dug. It was as if something were trying to push its way up through the buried debris. When she told David about the discovery, he grew worried. "Mom, stop this obsession with that plot of land. You're going to hurt yourself digging in that hard ground." "Son, I'm sure there's something important down there. The sound gets louder every time I dig." "What sound, Mom? I went there with you twice and I didn't hear anything." It was true. For some reason, David couldn't hear the noise she heard so clearly. That made her feel even more alone and misunderstood. Mr. Mitchell called a few days later with news about the case. "Mrs. Martha, I got some interesting information about Harrison Construction. They have a history of labor disputes. That strengthens our case." "That's good, Doctor. And how long will it take?" "Labor lawsuits can take 1 to 3 years, depending on the appeals the other side files. But rest assured, we have a solid case." 3 years seemed like an eternity to someone her age. Martha began to wonder if she would live long enough to see justice done. Meanwhile, she kept digging on the land. She had already removed a considerable amount of rubble and was forming a large pile of concrete chunks, broken bricks, and other construction debris. It was on a Thursday morning that she made a discovery that would change everything. She was digging in a new area, a bit farther from the rocks, when her hoe punched through a hole in the ground. Suddenly, a small stream of crystal-clear water gushed out. Martha stood frozen for a few seconds, unable to believe what she was seeing. Water. Clean, clear water springing from the arid soil of her land. "Oh my God!" she exclaimed, kneeling to touch the water with her hands. The water was ice-cold and had a pure taste, unlike anything she had ever tried. The noise she had been hearing for weeks finally made sense. It was the sound of water running beneath the earth, trying to find a way out through the rubble that had been dumped there. She ran to Old Joe's house to share the discovery. "Old Joe! Old Joe, the water! There's water on my land!" Her neighbor came out thinking she was feeling unwell. "Calm down, Mrs. Martha. What water?" "Come see. There's a spring on my land." The two of them hurried back to the site. Old Joe was speechless when he saw the water flowing from the hole she had dug. "Mrs. Martha, this is a blessing from God," he said, deeply moved. "We've been suffering from water shortages here for 15 years. Our wells dried up a long time ago. Do you think this water is really good? Judging by the color and the smell, it seems excellent, but you'd better have it tested to be sure." Martha immediately called David, who arrived in less than 2 hours bringing some empty bottles to collect water samples. "Mom, I can't believe this," he said, watching the small trickle of water springing from the ground. "How did you know there was water here?" "It was the noise, son. It was the sound of the water trying to escape through the rubble." David shook his head, amazed by his mother's intuition. He collected several samples and promised to take them to Houston for analysis. The results came back a week later and brought an even bigger surprise. Not only was the water fit for drinking, but it also had an interesting mineral composition, rich in magnesium and other elements beneficial to health. "Mum, this could be worth a lot of money," said David, studying the lab report. "Quality mineral water is $1 million business." "It's not about money, son. It's about justice." Martha had been right. That discovery wasn't just about wealth, but about an injustice that destiny was correcting. The land Richard Harrison had given away to get rid of her was in fact a hidden treasure. But the joy didn't last long. A week after the water discovery, Martha received an unexpected visit. 2 men in suits showed up on her property on a Monday morning. One of them introduced himself as a representative of Harrison Construction. "Are you Martha Miller?" asked the taller one, a bald man in his 50s. "I am, and who are you?" "My name is Charles Thompson. I'm a lawyer for Harrison Construction. This is my colleague, engineer William Parker." Martha felt a knot in her stomach. She knew that visit brought nothing good. "We're here to talk about an irregularity in the documentation of this land," the lawyer continued, pulling some papers from his briefcase. "What irregularity? The documents are all in order." "Actually, they're not. There's a technical problem in the description of the property boundaries. The area where you've been digging doesn't belong to the lot you received." "That's a lie!" Martha exclaimed, feeling her anger rise. "Ma'am, please calm down. We're willing to resolve this amicably. My client is offering $5,000 for the return of the land. $5,000. An amount that could solve many problems in her life, but which represented only a fraction of what that land was truly worth now." "I'm not selling anything to that wretched man," she answered, crossing her arms. "Ma'am, I understand your anger, but I recommend you think it over. If this goes to court, it could take years to resolve. And at your age, do you really want to be fighting in court?" The veiled threat made Martha even more furious. They were trying to use her age against her, as if being elderly meant being incapable. "You can leave now. I'm not selling anything." The 2 men exchanged glances and left, but not before the lawyer left a parting message. "Ma'am, my client doesn't usually take no for an answer. Think carefully about our offer." As soon as they left, Martha called Mr. Mitchell to tell him what had happened. "Mrs. Martha, this is a clear attempt at intimidation. They know you've discovered something valuable and want to get the land back. Mr. Mitchell, can they really challenge my ownership of the land?" "They can try, but it would be very difficult. The documents you have are legitimate. What they're doing is psychological pressure." "So what do I do now?" "Keep living your life normally and document everything. If they come back with more threats, call me immediately." Martha followed the lawyer's advice, but the worry wouldn't leave her alone. She began to realize she was being watched. Strange cars drove slowly down the dirt road while she was on the property. Sometimes she saw men standing in the distance, watching her activities. The psychological pressure was working. She started having trouble sleeping and lost her appetite. David noticed his mother's condition and decided to spend a few days in El Paso to keep her company. "Mom, we need to make this water discovery public. The more people who know, the harder it will be for them to do anything against you." "What do you mean, son?" "Let's go talk to the people at the local newspaper and the radio station. Let's tell your story. A hard-working woman exploited for 17 years who discovers mineral water on the land she received as payment." David's idea was good, but Martha was afraid of the exposure. She had always been a private person, preferring to handle her problems away from prying eyes. "I don't know, son. I don't like being in the spotlight." "Mom, this isn't about being in the spotlight. It's about protecting yourself. Once your story becomes public, they won't be able to do anything to you without everyone knowing." After much deliberation, Martha agreed. David managed to schedule an interview with a local radio station and another with the regional weekly newspaper. The article came out in Friday's edition with the headline, "After 17 years of exploitation, housekeeper discovers spring on land, received as payment." The story moved many readers and listeners across the region, but the attention also brought unexpected consequences. On Saturday morning, Martha found the spring contaminated with some kind of oil or chemical that had turned the water dark and strong-smelling. "My God, who did this?" she cried, watching her discovery ruined. Old Joe, who had come to help her clean up the area, shook his head in outrage. "Mrs. Martha, this was the work of bad people. Nobody does something this cruel by accident." "Old Joe, do you think the water will go back to normal?" "Maybe yes, maybe not. It depends on what they dumped in there. The best thing is to run new tests." Martha felt as if a piece of her heart had been torn out. That water represented so much more than money. It was proof that her intuition had been right, proof that she wasn't just some crazy old woman digging in the dirt for nothing. She called Mr. Mitchell and told him about the sabotage. "Mrs. Martha, this is a crime. We need to file a police report." "Sir, how are we going to prove it was them?" "We won't be able to prove it directly, but it'll be on record. And if it happens again, it'll establish a pattern of harassment." The report was filed, but everyone knew it would hardly lead to anything concrete. The El Paso police had more urgent problems to deal with than an elderly woman's dispute with a powerful businessman. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out here who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The weeks that followed were the hardest in Martha's life. The contamination of the spring had only been the beginning of a series of harassments and sabotages. First, they started spreading rumors that she had mental problems. Neighbors she barely knew began whispering when she walked by, pointing and making comments about the old woman who thinks she found treasure. Then came the more direct intimidation. Strange men would show up on the property when she was alone, claiming to be government workers doing routine inspections. They always arrived without official documents and asked questions about her activities. "Do you have a permit to be digging here?" asked one of them, a big, mean-looking man who claimed to be a city inspector. "I'm digging on my own property," she replied, trying to stay calm. "Ah, but you need a permit to dig, you know, especially if you're looking for underground water. Where's your identification?" The man made up some excuse and left, but Martha got the message. They wanted to make her give up through fear and intimidation. The pressure also came from another direction. Gertrude, the owner of the house where she had been living for 5 years, showed up with an unexpected proposal. "Martha, I need you to move out of the house by the end of the month." "What do you mean, Gertrude? I've always paid the rent on time." "It's just that my son is going to move in here. He needs the house." Martha knew that was a lie. Gertrude's son had lived in New York City for 10 years and had never shown any interest in coming back to El Paso. It was one more push for her to give up everything and leave town. "You can't just throw me out like that out of nowhere. I have rights." "Of course I can. The house is mine, and I let in whoever I want." The situation was becoming unbearable. Martha found herself pressured from all sides with nowhere to run. That was when she decided to take a desperate step. "David, I'm going to live on the land," she announced to her son during a phone call. "Mum, have you lost your mind? There isn't even a house there. How are you going to live out in the middle of nowhere?" "I'm going to build a little mud brick house like old Joe's. He said he'd help me." "Mum, for God's sake, you're 68 years old. You can't live in primitive conditions." "Son, I don't have a choice. Here in town they keep pressuring me until I leave. At least on the land nobody can push me out." David tried to talk her out of it, but he knew his mother's stubbornness well when she'd made up her mind. He decided to support her the only way he could, by helping build a decent shelter. "All right, Mum, but let's do this right. I'll hire a mason to build a small but decent house." "No need, son. Old Joe and I can handle it." "Mom, that's not negotiable. If you're going to live there, it has to be in a real house." In 2 weeks, a simple but sturdy little house was ready on Martha's land. It had 2 small rooms, a basic kitchen, and a bathroom. David installed solar panels for power and a small generator for emergencies. The move was painful. Martha was leaving behind the life she knew in town to live in an isolated area with no neighbors nearby except old Joe. But she also felt a freedom she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Mrs. Martha, you're a brave woman," said old Joe, helping her organize the few pieces of furniture in the new house. "At my age, I wouldn't have the courage to start over like that." "Old Joe, when you don't have a choice, courage shows up on its own." In the first few weeks living on the land, Martha discovered things about herself she didn't know. She had practical skills she'd never needed to use in town. She learned to fix small electrical problems, take care of a small vegetable garden, and even repair leaks. But most of all, she rediscovered her connection to the land. She woke up early to watch the sunrise and went to bed early, following the natural rhythm of the days. The simple life brought an inner peace she hadn't felt in decades. The spring, which had been contaminated, began to clean itself naturally after a few weeks. The water started flowing crystal clear again, as if the land itself were healing from the attacks it had suffered. "Nature is wise, Mrs. Martha," commented old Joe, watching the clean water run once more. "It knows how to heal itself when we let it." It was then that unexpected help appeared. Dr. Franklin Brooks, a retired geologist from the Federal University, had read about the case in the newspaper and decided to offer his knowledge free of charge. "Mrs. Martha, I'd like to do some studies on your land, if you'll allow me," he said, an elegant man in his 60s who had shown up on a Tuesday morning. "What kind of studies, Doctor?" "Hydrogeological studies. I want to understand where this water comes from and what the spring's real potential is." Dr. Brooks brought specialized equipment and spent 3 days taking measurements and collecting samples on the land. The results surprised him. "Mrs. Martha, you don't have a simple spring. You have access to a considerable aquifer that was artificially blocked." "What do you mean, Doctor?" "The debris they dumped here wasn't by accident. Someone knew about the existence of the underground water and wanted to prevent its natural access to the surface, probably to increase the value of other properties in the region. The revelation completely changed the perspective on what was happening. This wasn't just a heartless boss trying to get rid of an employee. It was a calculated scheme to hide water resources and manipulate land values." "Doctor, does this mean they knew about the water when they gave me the land?" "It's very likely. And if they knew, they may be committing an environmental crime by hiding water resources in a region that suffers from water scarcity." Dr. Brooks offered to prepare a complete, free technical report that could be used as evidence in a possible lawsuit. He also suggested contacting the district attorney's office to investigate possible environmental crimes. But before Martha could take any action, she received another intimidating visit. This time, 3 men showed up claiming to be representatives of a sanitation company. "Ma'am, we're here to notify you about irregularities in the use of water resources on this property," said the leader, a man in a dark suit who didn't properly identify himself. "What irregularities? The water springs naturally on my land." "You cannot exploit water resources without a license from the competent authorities. That's a crime against the environment." "I'm not exploiting anything. I just found out there's water here. But you're using this water, aren't you? And letting other people use it too. That constitutes commercial exploitation. It was true that some neighbors came to get water from Martha's spring. The region had been dealing with supply problems for years, and the clean, fresh water was a blessing for local families. But calling that commercial exploitation was absurd. I don't charge anyone for the water, she defended herself. You don't charge now, but you could start charging, and even by donating it, you're interfering with the region's water distribution system. The men left an official-looking paper resembling a notice and went away. Martha immediately called Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, can they forbid me from using the water on my own land? Mrs. Martha, this paper doesn't even look official. It doesn't have a government agency letterhead or a notarized signature. It's just another intimidation attempt. But what if it's true? What if using this water really is a crime? It's not a crime to use water that springs naturally on your property for your own consumption and for donating. What would be a crime is commercial exploitation without a license, but that's not what you're doing. The lawyer suggested she seek guidance from the appropriate environmental agencies to regularize the water use and protect herself from future accusations. Martha spent the following days researching water resource usage rights. She discovered the legislation was complex, but rural landowners had specific rights over water that sprang on their land, especially for domestic and animal consumption. It was during this research that she discovered something alarming. The region where her land was located had been the subject of a hydrological study 15 years earlier, exactly during the period when the debris was dumped there. The study, conducted by an environmental consulting firm, identified several points with potential for drilling artesian wells. One of those points was exactly where her spring was. Old Joe, they knew about the water from the beginning, she told her neighbor, showing him the documents she had found online. Then why did they dump the debris right here? To hide the water and be able to buy the land cheaply afterward. If they knew there was good water here, the price would be much higher. The puzzle was coming together. Richard Harrison and his construction company had access to the hydrological study through their contacts in the public sector. They knew exactly where the water resources were and schemed to hide them. The plan was simple. Dump rubble at the spots where water could naturally spring up, devalue the area, and then buy everything at low prices. When the right time came, they would simply remove the rubble and tap the water. Giving the land to Martha as payment for years of off-the-books work was just a way to get rid of an inconvenient witness while still keeping control over the area through apparent generosity. Mrs. Martha, this is far more serious than we imagined, said Dr. Brooks when she showed him the documents she had found. This is an elaborate fraud that harms the entire local community. Doctor, what can I do? First, let's document everything thoroughly. Then we'll take this information to the district attorney's office and the environmental agencies. Dr. Brooks spent another week on the property, this time accompanied by 2 fellow geologists. They did a complete survey of the region and confirmed that the aquifer extended over a much larger area than initially thought. Mrs. Martha, this could supply thousands of people, he said, showing the maps they had produced. It's an extremely valuable resource in a semi-arid region like this one. The results of the studies were compiled into a 50-page technical report that demonstrated not only the importance of the discovered water resources, but also the evidence that they had been deliberately concealed. When the report was ready, Mr. Mitchell scheduled a meeting with the district attorney in charge of environmental matters. Ryan Carter was a young man, recently arrived in El Paso, but with a reputation for being thorough and determined. Mrs. Martha, this case has elements of environmental crime, fraud, and labor exploitation, he said after analyzing all the documentation. We're going to open a full investigation. D.A. Carter, I just want justice to be done, she replied, moved to finally see her complaints being taken seriously. You can rest assured it will be. What's more, we're going to take measures to protect you from any kind of retaliation. The district attorney's office opened a civil investigation and ordered official experts to conduct new studies on the property. It also requested information from the IRS about Harrison Construction's activities over the past 20 years. The investigations revealed an even broader scheme. The construction company had used the same strategy in other locations in the region, always relying on inside information about natural resources. The pattern was always the same: dump rubble, buy devalued land, and then exploit the hidden resources. But this time the scheme had gone wrong. Martha hadn't sold the property as they had expected, and her stubbornness in digging the ground ended up exposing the whole crime. While the investigations were underway, life on the property brought unexpected discoveries for Martha. The spring water, after being tested by official laboratories, revealed properties even more interesting than initially imagined. Besides being rich in minerals beneficial to health, it had exceptional organoleptic characteristics, taste, odor, and appearance superior to most mineral waters sold on the market. "Mrs. Martha, you're sitting on a gold mine," Dr. Brooks joked when the results came in. "This water could be bottled and sold as premium mineral water." But Martha wasn't interested in personal gain. She had begun her fight for justice, and it would stay that way. "Doctor, if this water is so good, then it should be made available to those who need it, not to those who can afford it." Word of Martha's miracle water began to spread throughout the region. People came from far away to get a few liters of the crystal-clear water that sprang from her property. She never charged anything, just asked that everyone bring their own container. Her neighbors also benefited. Old Joe no longer had to worry about the lack of water for his animals. Other families in the area began visiting the spring regularly, always respecting the rules Martha had established: free water for household use, reselling prohibited. But her generosity brought unexpected problems. Water tanker trucks started showing up at the site, trying to collect large amounts of water to resell in town. Martha had to install a fence around the spring and set visiting hours. "Mrs. Martha, you need help managing this place," suggested Old Joe, watching the line of people that had formed on a Saturday morning. "Old Joe, I don't want to turn this into a business, but I also can't let people take advantage of the situation." The solution came through Dr. Brooks, who suggested creating a community association to manage the water resources. The idea was to involve the community itself in protecting and sustainably distributing the water. "That way, Mrs. Martha, you keep control, but you share the responsibility," he explained, "and you keep ill-intentioned people from taking advantage of the situation." The St. Rita Spring Users Association was created with 15 initial members, all local residents. Martha was chosen as lifetime president, but important decisions would be made at assembly meetings. The association's first decision was to establish clear rules for water use. Each family could take up to 50 liters per day for free. Larger amounts required authorization from the board and a special justification. They also decided to create a fund for the spring's maintenance and protection. Those who could and wanted to could contribute voluntarily, but the contribution would never be mandatory. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. That really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, the association's work soon caught the attention of non-governmental organizations working in the region. The Living Water NGO, which developed drinking water access projects in the semi-arid region, offered technical and financial support to improve the infrastructure around the spring. "Mrs. Martha, your work is an example for the entire region," said Chloe Foster, the NGO's coordinator. "You've shown that it's possible to manage natural resources in a community-based and sustainable way. With the NGO's support, a small treatment station was built to guarantee water quality even during periods of higher demand. Public drinking fountains were also installed, along with a gravity-fed distribution system for the nearby homes. The project caught the attention of the state press. A crew from Channel 8 News went to El Paso to do a story on Martha's Spring, as it had become known in the region. The story aired on a Sunday night and had a huge impact. Martha received dozens of phone calls from people wanting to learn about her story and offering support in various ways. But the exposure also brought negative consequences. Richard Harrison, who until then had avoided direct confrontations, decided to launch a legal offensive. He filed a lawsuit claiming the land had been given as a loan, not a donation, and that he wanted it back. "Mrs. Martha, this is a desperate move," explained Mr. Mitchell when he reviewed the new lawsuit. The documents you have prove it was a donation, not a loan. Doctor, but can they actually take the land back? It's very unlikely, but we're going to have to defend ourselves. They're trying to confuse the judge with technicalities. The legal battle intensified over the following months. Each side presented dozens of documents, witnesses, and technical arguments. Richard Harrison hired one of the most expensive law firms in Houston, while Martha relied only on Mr. Mitchell and the pro bono support of a few specialists. During this period, the intimidation resumed. Strange cars started driving around the area again, and unfamiliar people were asking questions about the association's activities. There were even attempts to contaminate the spring once more, but this time the community was organized and vigilant. "Mrs. Martha, they're getting desperate," observed Old Joe. "That's a sign you're winning." "Old Joe, sometimes I wonder if all this suffering is worth it. I'm 69 years old. I could be resting in a rocking chair." "You can rest whenever you want, but only after you win this war. Because this isn't just about you. It's about all of us." Old Joe was right. The fight had stopped being personal and had become a symbol of resistance against exploitation and injustice. People from all over the region were following the case and rooting for Martha's victory. The turning point came when the district attorney's office investigation uncovered documents proving the scheme to conceal water resources. Corrupt public officials had provided privileged information to the construction company in exchange for bribes. "Mrs. Martha, we now have concrete proof that there was a criminal scheme," reported D.A. Carter during a meeting in his office. "We're going to report everyone involved. Criminal charges were filed against Richard Harrison and 8 other people, including city officials and members of the State Water Resources Agency. The charges included environmental crimes, corruption, criminal conspiracy, and labor exploitation. The impact of the charges was devastating to Harrison Construction's public image. Clients cancelled contracts, suppliers suspended business, and banks blocked loans. Within a few months, the company that was once the most powerful in El Paso was on the verge of bankruptcy. Richard Harrison tried one last move. He offered $1 million settlement for Martha to drop all legal actions. "Mrs. Martha, my client is offering $500,000 to end all disputes," his lawyer said during a settlement hearing. $500,000, an amount that would completely change her life and provide a comfort she never imagined having. But accepting would mean allowing the crimes to go unpunished. "Counselor, you can tell your client that I don't sell my dignity," she replied, looking firmly at the lawyer. "Ma'am, think it over. Justice could take years longer. At your age, at my age, I learned that there are things more important than money." The settlement was refused and the case followed its normal course. But the refusal caused an unexpected turn in Martha's family. David, who had always supported his mother unconditionally, began to question her decision. "Mum, $500,000 would solve all our problems. You could have a peaceful old age with all the comfort you deserve." "Son, peace of mind can't be bought. If I accept that dirty money, I'll never be able to sleep in peace again." "But Mom, you've already made your point. Everyone recognizes you've been wronged. You don't need to keep fighting." "David, this fight isn't just mine. It's for everyone who was ever exploited by people like Richard Harrison." The disagreement with her son was one of the most painful things Martha experienced during the entire saga. David went almost 2 months without visiting her, hurt by what he considered his mother's excessive stubbornness. It was during this period of estrangement from her family that Martha found support from an unexpected source, other women who had been through similar situations. Mrs. Peggy, a 72-year-old woman who had been exploited for decades as an off-the-books housekeeper, sought Martha out after seeing her story on television. "Martha, I wanted to thank you for fighting for all of us," she said, holding her new friend's hands. "I never had the courage to stand up to the employers who robbed me of my entire life. Mrs. Peggy, it's never too late to seek justice. For me it already is, dear. But seeing your courage, I feel a little avenged too." Other women came forward with similar stories. Housekeepers, nannies, cooks, cleaners. They had all spent decades working off the books without rights, without dignity. Martha's fight had become a symbol for all of them. "You give me the strength to keep going. Martha said during an informal gathering they organized at the association. When I think about giving up, I remember that I'm not fighting just for myself. The support of the other women helped Martha get through the difficult time with David. It also made her realize that her fight had a much greater social dimension than she had initially imagined. Mr. Mitchell had the idea of turning the case into a class action lawsuit, representing all the housekeepers who had been exploited by Harrison Construction over the years. Mrs. Martha, we've found at least 15 women who worked for the construction company under conditions similar to yours, he explained. If they all join forces, we'll have a much stronger case. The class action lawsuit was filed 6 months later, representing 17 housekeepers who had been exploited by the company. The total amount of the claims exceeded $2 million. Richard Harrison realized he was losing control of the situation. His attempts at intimidation had failed. His criminal schemes were being exposed, and now he faced a class action lawsuit that could ruin him financially. It was then that he made his final and most desperate mistake. He tried to bribe the judge presiding over the case directly. D.A. Carter, I received a serious report, said Judge Floyd Graham during a private conversation with the prosecutor. Someone offered me money to rule in favor of the construction company. Judge, this is an extremely serious crime. We'll open an investigation immediately. The bribery attempt was the final blow to Richard Harrison's defense. In addition to all his other crimes, he now also faced bribery charges. His lawyers abandoned the case, and he was left with virtually no defense. The trial for the environmental and corruption crimes took place in a packed courtroom. Martha was one of the main witnesses, and her testimony moved everyone present. Your Honor, I don't seek revenge. I seek justice, she said, speaking into the microphone with a firm voice. Justice for me and for all the women who were exploited the way I was. Justice for the nature that was harmed. Justice for the community that was wronged. Richard Harrison was sentenced to 8 years in a maximum security prison for environmental crimes, bribery, and labor exploitation. He was also ordered to pay $3 million in collective compensation to the exploited workers. Harrison Construction was fined $5 million for the environmental crimes and ordered to fund the restoration of all areas where it had illegally dumped debris. When the sentence was read, Martha cried for the first time in the entire process. They weren't tears of sadness but of relief. Finally, after 3 years of fighting, justice had been served. David was present at the hearing and reconciled with his mother at that moment. Mom, forgive me for doubting you, he said, hugging her tightly. You were right. There are things more important than money. Son, you don't need to apologize. You only wanted to protect me. But now I understand that you were protecting yourself the only way you knew how, fighting for the truth. The legal victory brought national recognition to Martha's story. She was invited to speak at universities about labor rights and environmental protection. She received awards from human rights and environmental organizations. But what moved her the most were the letters she received from working women all over the country, telling their own stories of exploitation and thanking her for giving a voice to so many who had always remained silent. With the compensation money, Martha created a fund to support domestic workers in vulnerable situations. The fund offered free legal assistance and professional training courses. I received this blessing when I needed it most, she explained at the fund's launch. Now I want to share it with other women who are going through what I went through. The spring kept flowing with crystal clear water, now protected by law as the region's environmental heritage. A small park was built around it, with nature trails and an area for environmental education. Martha, at 71 years old, became a reference in sustainability and social justice, but she continued living in the same simple little house on the property, waking up early to tend the vegetable garden and receiving visitors who wanted to know her story. Mrs. Martha, haven't you thought about moving to a bigger, more comfortable house? Asked a journalist during an interview. Why would I, dear? Here I have everything I need. Peace, dignity, and the purest water in the world flowing from my land. Old Joe, now 76, remained her closest neighbor and faithful companion on their morning walks around the property. Mrs. Martha, who would have thought that land that seemed like a curse would turn into the greatest blessing of our lives, he reflected during one of those walks. Old Joe, I learned that blessings sometimes come disguised as problems. We just need the courage to dig deep and find the truth. Dr. Brooks continued visiting the site regularly, now accompanied by geology students who came to study the aquifer. The spring had become a natural laboratory for research on water resources in semi-arid regions. Mrs. Martha, your water is helping us better understand how to preserve water resources throughout the Southwest, he explained during one of those visits. Your discovery has scientific impact far beyond this region. The St. Rita Spring Users Association grew and became a model for other communities. It had more than 100 members and managed not only water distribution, but also sustainable agriculture and ecotourism projects. Mr. Mitchell, who had worked practically for free throughout the entire legal battle, refused any payment from the compensation. Mrs. Martha, working on your case was one of the greatest honors of my career, he said. Cases like this remind us why we chose to become lawyers. Mr. Mitchell, you should at least accept something. You worked so hard. My reward is seeing you victorious and continuing to help others. That is priceless. Martha's story inspired the creation of stricter laws for the protection of water resources and labor rights in the state of Texas. It also led to the creation of a state program for the regularization of domestic workers. Mrs. Martha paved the way for important changes in our society, said the governor during a ceremony where she received the title of Honorary Citizen of the state. Her courage benefited thousands of people who don't even know her. But for Martha, the greatest prize remained the sound of water running free on her land. It was the sound of justice done, of truth revealed, of dignity restored. Every morning she rose early to watch the sunrise reflecting on the surface of the spring. It was her moment of gratitude and reflection on the journey she had traveled. Thank you, Lord, for giving me the strength not to give up, she murmured in her morning prayers. And thank you for turning my greatest pain into the greatest joy of my life. The pain of having been exploited for 17 years had become the joy of being able to help other women avoid the same suffering. The land that had seemed like a punishment had turned out to be a divine gift. D.A. Carter, the prosecutor who had moved the case forward, visited Martha periodically to keep up with the developments in the lawsuit. Mrs. Martha, Richard Harrison's conviction set a precedent for dozens of other similar cases, he reported during one of those visits. Other businessmen are being investigated for similar practices. Sir, that makes me very happy. It means our fight was not in vain. Quite the contrary. Your fight is saving many other people from going through what you went through. The drought seasons, which had once been a cause of despair in the region, were now faced with greater peace of mind. Martha's Spring remained steady even during the most critical periods, ensuring water for the whole community. It's a genuine miracle, commented Mrs. Peggy, who had moved closer to the spring. 40 years living here, and I've never seen anything like it. Mrs. Peggy, the miracle isn't the water. The miracle is that we learned to work together to protect what is ours. Martha's wisdom impressed everyone who met her. At 72, she had become a natural leader, consulted by the community on many different matters. Young people from the area sought her advice about their professional lives. She always said the same thing. Work with dignity, demand your rights, and never let anyone exploit you. Older women came to her for encouragement to face difficult situations. Her advice was always, if I made it at 68, you can too. It's never too late to fight for justice. The spring continued to be studied by researchers from several universities. They discovered that the water had unique properties, resulting from the specific mineral composition of the region's subsoil. Mrs. Martha, this water could be sold for extremely high prices in the premium water market, suggested a businessman who had become interested in the venture. Young man, this water is not for sale. It never was, and it never will be. It belongs to the community, and that's how it's going to stay. But you could become rich. I'm already rich. I have my health, peace, true friends, and the satisfaction of having done the right thing. What greater wealth is there than that? The businessman left without understanding her answer, but everyone present applauded Martha's wisdom. David had moved permanently to El Paso and worked in the administration of the social projects created by his mother. Their relationship had grown much stronger after the reconciliation. "Mum, I'm so proud of you," he said during a Sunday lunch. "You taught me that there are things worth fighting for, even when they seem impossible. Son, you've always been my pride. You just needed to learn that sometimes the hardest path is the right one. And now I understand that. That's why I decided to change my life and come work here with you." David's move had been a surprise to everyone. He left a well-paid job in Houston to devote himself to his mother's social projects, earning much less, but gaining much more personal satisfaction. "Son, are you sure you're not sacrificing yourself for me?" "Mom, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something truly important. It's not sacrifice, it's fulfillment." Martha Miller's grandchildren, David's children, also started visiting their grandmother more often. They played in the crystal-clear waters of the spring and listened to her stories about the fight for justice. "Grandma, tell us again how you found the water," her 8-year-old granddaughter, Lily Miller, would always ask. "Oh, my dear, it was like this. I heard a noise coming from under the ground. Everyone said it was all in my head, but I knew there was something down there." "And weren't you afraid to dig all by yourself?" "Yes, I was, Lily. But sometimes you have to be brave even when you're scared. The important thing is to do what you know is right." Grandma's stories became life lessons for her grandchildren, who grew up learning about persistence, courage, and justice through the examples she had set. The area around the spring had transformed completely. What was once an arid, abandoned stretch of land was now a small green oasis, with community gardens, fruit trees, and even a small pond that had formed naturally from the spring's overflow. "Mrs. Martha, you turned this place into paradise," commented Chloe Foster from the Living Water NGO during one of her visits. "Chloe, I just discovered what was already here. Nature did the rest on its own, once we stopped mistreating it." Martha's example inspired other community-based natural resource management projects across the Southwest. Delegations from other states came to learn about the St. Rita Spring Users Association model. "You've created something truly unique here," said a researcher from the University of Louisiana. "A sustainable development model that respects both the environment and the community's needs." "Professor, we just did what had to be done," Martha replied humbly, "taking care of our land and our people." Years after discovering the spring, Martha kept learning new things. She took a basic computer course so she could answer the emails she received from people all over the world interested in her story. "Old Joe, can you imagine? A 73-year-old woman tinkering with a computer," she joked, trying to type a reply to a German student who was researching water resource management. "Mrs. Martha, you're not old, you're experienced, and experience is the most valuable thing there is. Old Joe, you always have the right words at the right time." Their friendship had grown even stronger over the years. They were companions on the journey, in conversation, and in dreams for the community's future. Dr. Brooks published a book about the case, with all royalties going to the support fund for housekeepers. The book became an academic reference and also an inspiration to ordinary people. "Mrs. Martha, your story proves that an ordinary person can make an extraordinary difference when they fight for what is right," he wrote in the dedication. "Doctor, anyone can do what I did. You just need the courage to listen to your own conscience." The spring had become a place of pilgrimage for people seeking inspiration and spiritual renewal. Martha always welcomed everyone warmly, offering fresh water and words of encouragement. "Mrs. Martha, how do you manage to stay so serene after everything you've been through?" asked a visitor who had faced similar struggles. "Dear, I learned that anger hurts the one who feels it more than the one who caused the problem. I'd rather spend my energy building good things than holding on to bitterness." "But don't you get outraged when you remember the injustices?" "I do get sad, yes, but I'm also grateful because those injustices led me to discover strengths I didn't know I had. And they allowed me to help other people." Martha's wisdom impressed psychologists and therapists who visited the site. Through experience, she had developed a deep understanding of resilience and overcoming adversity. "Ma'am, You could give lectures on personal development, suggested a psychologist from New York City. Doctor, I don't know how to speak fancy or use difficult words. All I know is how to tell my story and hope it serves as an example for someone. But that's exactly what people need to hear. Real stories of overcoming hardship, not complicated theories. Martha ended up accepting some invitations to tell her story at events about human rights and sustainability. She always spoke simply, but her words touched audiences deeply. I'm not a heroine, she always said at the end of her talks. I'm just an ordinary woman who refused to accept injustice. Any of you can do the same when the time comes. Applications arrived from universities all over the world wanting to study the Martha model of sustainable community management. Researchers from Japan, Germany, the United States, and many other countries visited the spring. Mrs. Martha, you've become internationally known, a journalist informed her during an interview. Really? Well, isn't that something? A person who could barely read when this story started is now studied by scholars from all over the world. How do you feel about this transformation? I feel responsible, because now I can't make mistakes. There are many people watching and expecting us to keep doing things the right way. Responsibility didn't weigh on her like a burden, but rather as motivation to keep striving for excellence in everything she did. The Springs management model was adapted and implemented in more than 50 communities across the United States. Each one kept its local characteristics, but followed the basic principles established by Martha: democratic management, free access for basic needs, and environmental protection. Mrs. Martha, you planted a seed that sprouted in dozens of places, said the State Environmental Secretary during an official visit. Sir, good seeds always find fertile ground to grow. The important thing is to plant with love and care for them tenderly. The model's secret to success was its simplicity and humanity. It didn't depend on complex technologies or high investments, but on people's ability to organize themselves around common goals. Richard Harrison, serving his sentence at the Huntsville Penitentiary, never accepted his defeat. He sent several letters to Martha asking for forgiveness and offering money in exchange for a favorable word with the authorities. Mrs. Martha, what do you think about replying to his letters? Asked Mr. Mitchell. Sir, I've already forgiven him in my heart, but forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or making things easier. He needs to serve his sentence and learn from the mistakes he made. Don't you have any desire to see him suffer? No, sir, I want him to reflect and change. If he leaves prison a better person, then justice will have truly worked. Martha's magnanimity impressed everyone. She had turned pain into wisdom and suffering into compassion. Some of the former Harrison construction employees, who had lost their jobs after the company went bankrupt, sought Martha out asking for help to start their lives over. Mrs. Martha, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but could you give me a chance? Son, the past is in the past. If you want to work honestly, I can try to help you. She helped several of them find new jobs or start their own small businesses. Some became her most loyal collaborators in social projects. Mrs. Martha, why do you help people who worked for someone who harmed you? Because they were just earning their living. The one to blame was the boss, not the employees. Her ability to separate people from situations, to forgive without forgetting, to be firm without being cruel, made her a respected and beloved leader. The spring kept flowing with crystal clear water, now protected by an environmental reserve created by state decree. The Martha Miller Nature Reserve spanned 500 hectares and was home to several species of plants and animals typical of the desert scrub. Mrs. Martha, how do you feel about having an ecological reserve named after you? I feel honored but also concerned. Now I have to make sure that name is always remembered for good things. The reserve became a destination for ecotourism, generating income for the entire region. Family inns, restaurants serving regional cuisine, and handicraft shops sprang up in the surrounding areas, always respecting the established environmental standards. You have turned this region into a model of sustainable development, said the Environment Secretary during the official inauguration of the reserve. Mr. Secretary, we just showed that it's possible to grow without destroying, that it's possible to prosper by taking care of nature, not by destroying it. Martha's example influenced public policy in several states. Stricter laws to protect water resources were passed using her case as a reference. "Mrs. Martha, you have become a national reference in sustainability," said a congressman during a public hearing on water resources. "Congressman, I just became a stubborn old woman who wouldn't accept injustice." The rest was a consequence. Her humility contrasted with the greatness of her achievements. At 75 years old, she still lived in the same simple little house, waking up early to tend her vegetable garden and receiving visitors with fresh water and wise words. "Mrs. Martha, aren't you thinking about writing a book telling your story?" "Honey, I can barely write properly, but if someone wants to write it for me, I'll gladly tell them everything." Several writers offered to write her biography. She chose a young local journalist who promised to donate part of the proceeds to the support fund for housekeepers. The book became a national bestseller and was translated into several languages. The film based on her story was in production, with a famous actress playing Martha. "Mrs. Martha, how do you feel about seeing your life turned into a movie? It's strange, isn't it? But if it serves to inspire other people to fight for their own rights, then it's worth it." Fame never changed her essence. She remained the same simple, wise woman who had discovered water where everyone saw only stone. Mr. Mitchell, now a state representative, always consulted her about bills related to workers' rights. "Mrs. Martha, you are my unofficial advisor. Your ideas always make more sense than the experts." "Mr. Mitchell, I'm an expert on the suffering of the poor, that's for sure. An expert on other things, no. But that's exactly the experience that's missing in government offices. That's why I always come to get your opinion." Martha became a respected voice on social issues, always defending the most vulnerable and fighting against all forms of exploitation. Old Joe, now 80 years old, remained her most faithful companion. Together they walked every morning around the spring, observing how life had flourished in that place that once seemed barren. "Mrs. Martha, when we first met, who would have thought it would lead to all this? Old Joe, life is full of surprises. We just need to be open to receiving them, and have the courage to fight for them, right? That too, but above all, have faith that things can change for the better, even when everything seems lost." Martha's faith had become contagious. People from everywhere came to the spring not just for pure water, but also to renew their hope and courage to face their own challenges. "Mrs. Martha, what would you say to someone going through a difficult situation like the one you faced?" "I'd say don't give up. Sometimes the answer is right under our feet, but we only find it if we keep digging. And never ever accept being treated with disrespect." Her simple words carried the weight of someone who had lived every one of them. They weren't just advice, they were testimonies of a life. The St. Rita Spring Users Association had grown and become a federation bringing together more than 100 communities across the Southwest. All of them followed the principles Martha had established: democratic management, environmental sustainability, and social justice. "Mrs. Martha, you started a movement," said the Federation's president during a General Assembly. "I didn't start anything. I just showed that when people come together for a just cause, things happen." The movement had become a significant political force, influencing elections and public policy throughout the region. Candidates sought Martha's support, knowing her word carried weight with the communities. "Mrs. Martha, have you ever thought about running for public office?" "Dear, I already have a position, taking care of the spring and helping those in need. I don't need a title for that." Her refusal to get directly involved in partisan politics only increased her prestige. She was seen as someone above petty interests, focused solely on the common good. Scientific studies on the spring continued to reveal surprises. The water had developed a unique microbiota with natural probiotic properties that could have medicinal applications. "Mrs. Martha, this discovery could be worth millions in the pharmaceutical industry," explained an American researcher. "Doctor, if this water can help cure diseases, then it should be available to those who need it, not just those who can pay." "But you could license the use and put the royalties toward your social projects." "Doctor, I don't understand much about these things, but if it's about helping more people, then let's talk." After many meetings and consultations with experts, an international foundation was created to research and develop medicines based on the spring's microbiota. All profits would go to social projects in underserved communities. "Mrs. Martha, you're about to revolutionize natural medicine," said the foundation's director. "Doctor, I just want this blessing God gave me to keep helping people. If it's through medicine, even better." News that Martha's Water could produce new medicines attracted worldwide attention. Businessmen, scientists, and governments offered fortunes for exclusive access to the spring. "Mrs. Martha, they're offering billions of dollars," David reported, impressed by the proposals arriving daily. "Son, billions of dollars can't buy the peace I have here, or the certainty that I'm doing the right thing." "But Mom, with that money we could help millions of people." "David, we're already helping millions of people, and we're doing it the right way without selling ourselves to anyone." Martha's wisdom in refusing tempting offers further strengthened her image as an ethical and incorruptible leader. Governments from various countries began consulting her on policies for sustainable management of natural resources. "Mrs. Martha, how do you manage to resist all these temptations?" asked an international journalist. "Son, when you've had everything taken from you once, you learn to value what really matters, and money is never at the top of the list." "And what is at the top of the list?" "Dignity, respect, family, true friends, and the satisfaction of sleeping in peace, knowing you did the right thing." Her simple yet profound answers were quoted in universities and leadership seminars all over the world. Martha had become, without meaning to, a philosopher of practical life. The region around the spring continued to develop sustainably. Technical schools were created to train young people in environmental management and community development. "Mrs. Martha, these young people are learning from your example," said the principal of one of the schools. "Teacher, they are learning that it's possible to change the world starting in your own backyard." The young people trained in these schools became multipliers of the model in other regions. They took the knowledge they had acquired to distant communities, always citing Martha as their inspiration. "Mrs. Martha, you have become a living legend," said one of those young people upon returning from a mission in New Mexico. "Son, a legend is something for those who have passed on. I'm still here learning every day." "But you have inspired so many people, and you inspire even more people. That's what's beautiful, seeing that the seed keeps sprouting in new soil." The chain of inspiration had become a global movement. Communities in Africa, Asia, and Latin America adapted Martha's principles to their local realities. "Mrs. Martha, letters are arriving from communities all over the world telling how they are applying your ideas," said David Miller, organizing the international correspondence. "What a joy, son. Who would have thought that an old woman from El Paso would have useful ideas for so many different people? Mom, your ideas are universal because they speak of things that all human beings understand: justice, dignity, solidarity." At 77, Martha remained active and lucid. She woke up early, tended her vegetable garden, received visitors, and took part in the community's important decisions. Her health was enviable for someone her age. "Mrs. Martha, what's the secret to your vitality?" asked a geriatric doctor who visited the region. "Doctor, I think it's having a purpose. As long as I know I can help someone, I'll have a reason to get out of bed every day." "And your diet? Physical activity?" "That helps too. But the main thing is peace of mind. When you're at peace with your choices, your body becomes stronger too." Medical studies confirmed her empirical observations. People involved in altruistic activities and with a sense of purpose did indeed show better physical and mental health. The spring had become a natural laboratory, not only for environmental studies, but also for research on longevity and quality of life. "Mrs. Martha, you could be the subject of research on healthy aging," suggested a geriatrician. "Doctor, if that helps other elderly people live better, you can study me all you want." Her willingness to contribute to scientific knowledge resulted in several studies that showed the importance of social engagement for healthy aging. Dr. Brooks, now 70 years old, continued coordinating environmental research in the region. He had published more than 50 scientific articles based on studies of the spring. Mrs. Martha, our collaboration produced more scientific knowledge than many million-dollar laboratories, he said during one of his visits. Doctor, so it's true what they say, that nature is the best teacher. Exactly. And you were our best student, learning to read the signs the land was giving. The signs that Martha had known how to interpret decades ago continued to be studied by scientists, trying to understand how she had managed to detect the presence of water through sound. Mrs. Martha, how did you know the noise came from the water? Asked an acoustics researcher. Son, I didn't know. She just felt that there was something down there. Call it intuition, experience, luck. The name doesn't matter. But there must be some scientific explanation. There might be. But sometimes science hasn't yet figured out how to explain things we already know in our hearts. Her folk wisdom continued to amaze academics used to searching for theoretical explanations for everything. Martha represented a kind of knowledge that science was rediscovering, the importance of intuition and practical experience. The visitor center built near the spring received delegations from universities, governments, and international organizations practically every day. Martha always made a point of personally receiving the most important groups. Mrs. Martha, how do you find the time to receive so many people? Honey, receiving people who want to learn is a pleasure, not a job. Besides, I learn a lot from them too. What do you learn? That the world's problems are very much alike no matter where you are, and that the solutions tend to be alike too, people of goodwill working together. Her simple observations often generated valuable insights for specialists in international development and public policy. The UN invited Martha to take part in a world conference on water resources. It would be her first international trip at 78 years old. Mrs. Martha, you're going to represent the United States at a UN conference, said David, moved by the invitation. Son, representing the United States is a huge responsibility. Do you think I'm ready? Mom, if there's anyone in the world prepared to talk about sustainable water management, it's you. The trip to New York was a transformative experience for Martha. Seeing representatives from nearly 200 countries gathered to discuss problems similar to the ones she had faced made her realize the global dimension of her local struggle. Ladies and gentlemen, I am just a simple woman from the American countryside, she said in her speech at the UN. But I learned that when we stand up for what is right, it doesn't matter if we are big or small, rich or poor. Justice has no size and no nationality. Her speech, delivered without a memorized text and with her characteristic sincerity, moved the audience and was considered one of the most impactful of the conference. Mrs. Miller, your speech was deeply moving, said the UN Secretary-General in English, through a translator. Tell him I'm glad if my words touch someone's heart. Because that's where they came from, she replied. The impact of her participation at the UN was immediate. Countries from every continent requested technical cooperation to implement the Martha model in their rural communities. Mrs. Martha, you have become a world reference, said the US ambassador to the UN. Mr. Ambassador, the world needs simple examples of how to care for nature and people at the same time. If my story serves that purpose, then all the suffering was worth it. Back in the United States, Martha received a warm welcome at the Houston airport. Hundreds of people, especially working women, came to honor her return. Mrs. Martha, Mrs. Martha, the people shouted, waving signs and flowers. Folks, what kind of reception is this? She asked, moved. You represented all of us out there, said a housekeeper. You showed that poor people have value too. Emotion overwhelmed Martha. Once again, she realized that her personal struggle had become a symbol of dignity for millions of people. Back in El Paso, she found the spring more beautiful than ever. During her week-long absence, the community had organized a joint effort to make the surrounding gardens even more beautiful. Old Joe, you didn't have to do this, she said, looking at the newly planted flowers. Mrs. Martha, we wanted you to find everything beautiful when you got back. You honored our community out there. Old Joe, it was you who honored me by continuing to take care of everything with such care. The harmony of the community around the spring contrasted with the conflicts Martha saw in the world. There, people of different ages, social classes, and political opinions worked together for the common good. Mrs. Martha, what's the secret to keeping so much unity in the community? Asked a sociologist studying the phenomenon. Professor, the secret is that we always remember we're working for something bigger than ourselves. When the goal is noble, people set aside their small differences. And when conflicts arise, when they do, we sit down, talk, and remember why we're here. That usually solves it. Her ability to mediate conflicts had become legendary. People from other regions sought her help to resolve community disputes. Mrs. Martha, how do you always find a solution that leaves everyone satisfied? Sweetheart, I'm not trying to leave everyone satisfied. I'm trying to find what's fair for everyone. Sometimes that doesn't make anyone completely happy, but it leaves everyone at peace. Her mediation philosophy was studied by conflict resolution experts who admired her ability to focus on what mattered and ignore the rest. The years went by, and Martha remained an active force in the community. At 80 years old, she still woke up early, tended the vegetable garden, and received visitors with the same energy as always. Mrs. Martha, aren't you thinking about slowing down? Asked a doctor concerned about her busy schedule. Doctor, when I slow down, my heart will understand it's time to stop beating. I'd rather stay active as long as God allows. Her vitality kept impressing everyone. It seemed her sense of purpose gave her endless energy. David, now 55, gradually took on more responsibilities in managing the projects, always under his mother's wise guidance. Mom, I'd like you to move more into the role of consultant and less into the role of execution. Son, a consultant is someone who sits at a desk giving opinions. I like being where things actually happen. But you've already proven everything you needed to prove. You can let others carry out your ideas. David, ideas only work when you keep an eye on whether they're being carried out properly. You can't just hand them off to others and expect everything to work out. Her hands-on dedication remained a defining trait. Even holding a position of a leader respected worldwide, she never lost direct contact with the practical work. The spring continued to flow with crystal-clear water, now protected by a complex monitoring system that ensured its preservation for future generations. Technology had arrived, but always respecting the natural harmony of the environment. Mrs. Martha, how do you see this coexistence between tradition and modernity here at the spring? Sweetheart, tradition and modernity can be friends when modernity serves to protect tradition, not destroy it. And when they come into conflict, then we sit down and talk to see which one is better serving the people and nature. Usually the answer becomes clear. Her wisdom in balancing progress and preservation was sought after by governments and companies facing similar dilemmas in their projects. Mr. Mitchell, now a U.S. Senator, continued consulting Martha on bills related to social and environmental rights. Mrs. Martha, your practical sense is worth more than all the technical reports I receive, he said during one of his visits. Doctor, the technical side is important, but the practical side is essential. What good is a perfect law on paper if it doesn't work in real life? That's why I always come to get your opinion before voting on important bills. Her influence on American politics was indirect but significant. Several legislators consulted her regularly, knowing that her approval carried weight with social movements. The global movement, inspired by her story, kept growing. Communities in Africa implemented water management systems based on her principles. Women's groups in Asia organized cooperatives, following her example of community organization. Mrs. Martha, a letter arrived from a community in Kenya telling how they are applying your ideas there, said David, translating the international correspondence. What a joy, son. Who would have thought that a little squabble over a plot of land in El Paso would help people on the other side of the world? Mom, it wasn't a squabble. It was a fight for justice that inspired millions of people. Maybe so, David. But for me, it's still about doing what's right, no matter the size of the consequences. Her humility before the magnitude of her achievements continued to charm everyone who knew her. The research center built near the spring had become a world reference in sustainable development. It received researchers from dozens of countries who came to study not only the technical aspects of the project, but mainly its human dimension. Mrs. Martha, What sets this project apart from so many others around the world? Asked a researcher from Oxford University. Professor, I think it's because here we never forgot that behind every number, every chart, every project, there are real people with real needs. What do you mean? Sustainable development isn't just about planting trees and saving water. It's about giving dignity to people and hope for the future of their children. Her simple but profound definitions often redirected complex academic discussions toward fundamental questions of the human experience. The economic sustainability of the project had also proven itself over the years. Ecotourism, the sale of local organic products, and royalties from scientific research generated enough income to maintain the entire infrastructure and still fund new social projects. Mrs. Martha, you proved that it's possible to be socially and environmentally sound while also being economically viable, said an economist from ECLAC. Doctor, we proved that when you do the right things, they tend to work out in every area. But that's not always the case. It's not easy, I agree. But when you have persistence, transparency, and a focus on the common good, things work themselves out. The economic model developed at the Spring was being studied by international organizations as an example of conscious capitalism applied to small communities. Old Joe, now 85, remained Martha's most faithful companion. Despite his advanced age, he still insisted on joining her on her morning walks. Mrs. Martha, do you think we'll live to see the end of this story? Old Joe, what we planted here has no end. It will keep growing long after we're gone. That's a beautiful thought, isn't it? Yes, Old Joe. Leaving the world a little better than we found it is the best gift you can give to those who come after. The awareness of mortality didn't bring them sadness, but a sense of positive urgency to keep doing good while they still could. Martha began working on her memoirs, not to glorify her achievements, but to document the lessons learned along the journey. Mrs. Martha, why did you decide to write your memoirs now? Sweetheart, I realized that people are more interested in the story of the struggle than in the final outcome. And maybe my experience can help someone going through similar difficulties. The memoir was written in simple language, focused on practical life lessons more than on the dramatic aspects of the story. I don't want people to feel sorry for me, she told the ghostwriter who was helping her. I want them to feel inspired to fight for their own causes. The book became an international bestseller, translated into more than 30 languages. But Martha insisted that all profits go to social projects. Mrs. Martha, you could become a millionaire with this book, commented the editor. Son, I'm already a millionaire. I have my health, my family, my friends, a purpose in life, and peace of mind. What greater wealth is there? Her definition of wealth continued to inspire people around the world who were seeking a more meaningful life beyond material success. Schools in the region included Martha's story in their curricula as an example of citizenship and leadership. Children learned from an early age about perseverance, social justice, and environmental protection through her biography. Aunt Martha, tell us again how you discovered the water, the children would ask during her visits to schools. Children, I discovered the water because I learned to listen. You can also discover amazing things if you learn to pay attention to what the world is trying to tell you. Her ability to translate complex concepts into language children could understand made her a natural educator, admired by education specialists and teachers. The principles developed at the Spring were codified into a set of guidelines known as the Martha Protocol for community-based management of natural resources. The protocol was being implemented in more than 200 projects spread across 5 continents. Mrs. Martha, your name is literally changing the world, said a representative of the United Nations Development Program. Young man, it's not my name that's changing anything. It's people of goodwill who are using these ideas to make a difference in their communities. But you were the one who inspired all of this. I was just the first. The credit belongs to everyone who kept carrying the idea forward. Her insistence on sharing the credit reflected genuine humility and a deep understanding that lasting change depends on collective efforts. At 82, Martha was diagnosed with a heart condition that required special care. For the first time, she had to accept limitations in her intense routine. "Doctor, how much time do I have in?" she asked the cardiologist directly. "Mrs. Martha, with proper care, you can live for many more years, but you need to slow down. And without proper care, well, it would be risky to maintain this intense routine. Doctor, I'd rather live 2 years doing what I love than 10 years in a rocking chair waiting for death." Her deliberate choice of quality of life over quantity reflected a mature philosophy about aging and purpose. David was worried about his mother's decision, but respected her autonomy. "Mom, at least accept help with the heavier tasks." "All right, son. But I don't want to be treated like an invalid. As long as I can contribute, I will contribute. And when you can't anymore, then I'll teach. Teaching is another way of contributing." Her gradual transition from doer to mentor was carried out with wisdom and elegance, without losing the active spirit that had always defined her. The medical diagnosis was kept confidential to avoid unnecessary commotion, but Martha began discreetly preparing her succession in the projects. "Old Joe, we need to start preparing the younger ones to run things on their own," she said during one of their walks. "Mrs. Martha, you're talking as if you were leaving tomorrow." "Not tomorrow, Old Joe, but one day we'll all leave, and the work needs to continue without us." Her pragmatism about mortality wasn't morbid, but responsible. She wanted to ensure the legacy would be preserved and developed by the next generations. The succession planning revealed a lesser-known side of Martha, her ability to identify and develop leaders. She had cultivated a generation of young leaders who had not only technical competence, but also the ethical values needed to continue the work. "Mrs. Martha, how did you manage to train so many competent leaders?" "Child, leadership isn't taught in books. It's taught through example and the trust you place in people." "What do you mean?" "You show how it's done by doing it. Then you let them try, even if they make mistakes. And when they make mistakes, you don't give up on them. You teach them again." Her informal leadership development methodology was being studied by business schools as an alternative model to traditional methods. The spring continued to be the symbolic and practical heart of the entire operation. Even with her health growing more fragile, Martha made a point of visiting it daily, even if only for a few minutes. "Mrs. Martha, why do you insist on coming here every day?" "Because this is where it all began. This is where I renew my energy and my faith." "What do you have faith in?" "In the goodness of people, in the strength of nature, in divine justice, and in the ability we all have to make a difference." Her faith, built through experience and triumph over suffering, radiated a serenity that was contagious to everyone around her. The global movement inspired by Martha continued to grow, now with a life of its own. Leaders trained in her school of life carried the principles to remote corners of the planet, always adapting to local realities while maintaining the humanist essence. "Mrs. Martha, your movement no longer depends on you," observed a sociologist studying leadership phenomena. "Thank God, Professor. Movements that depend on a single person don't last. Those sustained by solid principles and prepared people last for generations." "Did you plan this from the start?" "No, I didn't plan it. But I always knew that if I wanted things to continue after me, I'd have to train people capable of carrying it on their own." Her long-term strategic vision had ensured the institutional sustainability of the movement, something rare in organizations centered on charismatic leaders. The end. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you're listening from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Martha made the right decisions throughout her journey? We look forward to reading your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories.